Okay, we have reached the magic number of 50, and I want to welcome you again to the webinar, More Books with Less Hassle, Resources to Improve Book Procurement and Strengthen Foundational Learning, which is hosted today by the Global Book Alliance and features speakers from USAID, EnCompass, and the World Bank. My name is Joanie Cohen-Mitchell, for those of you I have yet to meet, and I am the Acting Deputy Director Technical at the Center for Education at USAID. I am well acquainted with the often frustrating process of book procurement, having spent a good deal of time working for an implementing partner. My first encounter with books and the whole idea of a book chain was in Haiti in 1994. So I have spent many decades thinking about this thorny issue, and we're excited to share what we've learned and learn from you, who all probably have lots of thoughts on how to do a better job on the book chain. But before we jump right into this exciting topic today, I'm going to go over a few of the Zoom housekeeping points so that we're all on the same page. First, we want to know who you are. We want to know more about you. In the chat, please put your name, where you're calling in from and your affiliation, and why you are attending this webinar. What is it you want to know specifically about books in the book chain, or what do you have to share with us? If you required closed captions, you'll find a live transcript button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Click this and it will enable the feature. If you need some support, put something in the chat and we will do our best to help you. Finally, at the end of our webinar, we've saved some time for questions and answers. During our presentations, if you do have a question for a panelist, please add it to the question and answer feature, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And don't forget to vote for your favorite questions to be asked, and those will likely be the ones we respond to first. Great. If there's no questions about the housekeeping, I'm going to jump right into our topic, which we're so excited about. USAID, the World Bank, and the Global Book Alliance are excited for today's webinar because it focuses not only on how to get books into the hands of children, but also highlights why all kinds of books and learning materials, ranging from teacher's guide to student textbooks, both leveled and decodable, as well as supplemental reading materials, are crucial to overcoming learning poverty, which sharply increased across the globe due to the pandemic and other disruptions to the education system. We will also discuss how we can increase access to these teaching and learning materials so that all children and the adults or caregivers who work with them have books and have materials that create an enabling environment for reading and comprehension, more importantly. At the Global Book Alliance, of which USAID and the World Bank are both steering committee members, our mission is to guarantee that children everywhere have the learning materials they need to learn to read. This ambitious vision demands market-based transformation in book development, procurement, distribution, and book use, which are all critical steps of what we call the book chain. As a partnership of donors, multilateral agencies, and non-governmental organizations, the GBA's vision is a world in which all children everywhere have access to quality books in languages that they understand, here at home in their community, and use these books and reading materials to learn to read. We hope that today you'll learn practical lessons and informative ways to ease the burdens of book procurement that you can bring back to your agency, your coworkers, your organization, your community, your ministry, wherever you find yourself, And be sure to put that in the chat so we know who we're talking to today. So to start out, I'm going to ask you to do something else to put in the chat. Why do we need to get books into the hands of children? Put a phrase or a sentence into the chat for some of the reasons that you see to make sure that all children have books in languages that they speak and understand. Would love to hear your thoughts, and we'll probably draw on this as we come to the Q&A at the end of our presentation. So I'm going to go over some things that might already be well known to all of you. And if so, bear with me, but for others, this might be new information. The ability to read does not develop naturally for all children. In fact, for most learners, cracking the code does not happen without careful planning and instruction. Children in particular need regular and active interactions with print. Specific abilities required for reading come from immediate experiences with both oral and written language. Experiences in these early years begin to define the assumptions and the expectations about becoming literate and give children the motivation to work toward learning to read. Studies demonstrate that exposure to books contributes to the development of young children's emergent literacy abilities, including important skills like letter recognition and the more general concept of print. In fact, research in the global north found that reading with an adult generates more language input than toy play or other adult-child activities and interactions. Beyond the clear connection between reading and literacy, language acquisition, and cognitive development, ample evidence, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, indicates that book reading supports many additional benefits. So how do we create a book-friendly environment? I'm going to highlight a few points from a recently completed study by USAID entitled Beyond Supply: Strategies to Promote Book Use in the Classroom. And our own Emma was one of the co-authors of this, and you'll hear from her later this morning. So a first thing we need to think about is the notion of creating a book-friendly enabling environment, ensuring careful and attentive design of a classroom or non-formal learning setting that is print-rich and has specific child-friendly book areas and reading spaces. We need to provide teachers with training and specific ways to create book utilization, managing a pro-book friendly environment, and using meaningful strategies that have evidence behind them, like read alouds or choral reading or partner reading. And here's where the book chain comes in. We need to supply a learning environment with a wide variety of age-appropriate fiction and nonfiction books that are culturally, contextually, and linguistically relevant and accessible to all learners. And finally, given where we are in our history, we need to think carefully about electronic literacy and reading resources, and also about the strategies that we use to deliberately plan if we intend to use electronic resources. So it's impossible to learn to read without books. Our world has a global book gap, and many children around the globe lack access to essential learning resources, including both print and digital textbooks and supplemental reading materials. Many children do not have textbooks from which to learn. Even fewer globally are the number of books available in languages that children can read and understand. Recent data from UNICEF found that only half of the children between 36 and 59 months old had at least one book at home. USAID believes strongly that every child, every learner must be issued their own essential reading materials designed specifically for reading instruction. Sharing or having them occasionally in the classroom is not sufficient. Ensuring access to books is a fundamental component of eliminating learning poverty, an aim shared by donors and partner governments around the world. And finally, books are not just a nice to have, they're a must have. As a sector, we need to figure out how we can press upon donors, governments, implementers, and any other stakeholder on why we need to get books in the hands of children and how we can do it more effectively and efficiently. I'm going to leave you with 3 reasons books for children are critical before I let our presenters, talk more. Low learning levels, the barriers children face. The pre-COVID learning crisis has been made even more severe by the pandemic. The recent report that came out in the summer, the update to the Learning Poverty Report, is very clear. 6 out of every 10 children suffer from learning poverty. And that's measured by how many children are unable to read and understand a simple text by the age of 10. Think about it, 6 out of 10, which means that only 4 children globally at the age of 10 can read a simple sentence. That takes us to why foundational learning is so critical. The share of children unable to read with comprehension at age 10 is a signal of the overall quality of an education system and learning system in a country. It's not enough to crack the code. We need children comprehending so that they can learn critical information to become informed citizens. Foundational learning provides the building blocks for all other learning, knowledge, and most importantly, the higher order skills that children and young people need to take them through the education system. Ensuring foundational literacy for all contributes to productive citizenship, sustainable development, peace and prosperity, gender equity, and really bolsters all of the sustainable development goals, and in particular, the one we care so deeply about, Sustainable Development Goal 4. So how do we get more books and learning materials into the hands of children? An effective supply of books requires high quality title development and languages and formats that children can use and understand, access to those titles by printers and publishers, and most importantly, a functioning supply chain to deliver books into their potential readers. Today, my 2 esteemed colleagues are going to dive deeper into how, in very concrete ways, we can improve the ways we approach book procurement. Last year, USAID commissioned a global study on the cost of books, as well as the drivers behind these costs. To share findings from this report is my colleague, Emma Venetis of EnCompass. Emma is a monitoring, evaluation, and learning specialist at EnCompass. She has been a member of the Data and Evidence for Education Programs project with USAID's Center for Education for over 3 years now. A key part of her role is to lead the cost measurement work under the project, where she convenes partners, conducts cost analysis, and develops guidance and training on USAID's cost measurement and analysis approaches. And as I mentioned earlier, she's also the co-author on how to use books better in the classroom. Finally, we're going to hear from Penelope Bender, who will share 10 very concrete and easy ways to improve book procurement and lower these costs, as well as new guidance and tools from the World Bank that support practitioners through every stage of the book procurement process, from designing to printing to distribution. Penelope is a lead reading specialist at the World Bank, where she leads early reading and book supply chain work for the Read at Home program, as well as many others at the World Bank. Prior to returning to the bank, she was the head of global education services at Berta Education, an international publishing, printing, and distribution company. And she came to Berta from USAID, where she led the reading team, overseeing many millions of dollars in education program financing and supervising the implementation of reading programs in more than 40 countries. She's the founder and coordinator. She was the founder and coordinator of the Global Book Alliance, one of the sponsors of today. And prior to that, she was at both the Gates Foundation and the Hewlett-Packard Foundation. She began her career at the World Bank and led education program development in West Africa and Central Africa. And she has a master's from Harvard and a PhD from Michigan State. So I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed colleagues now, and Emma is going to get us started. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joanie. Hi, everyone. I am here today to share with you findings about the cost of teaching and learning materials study that our team conducted. The DEEP team with the USAID Center for Education, for which I am a part, is putting a lot of effort into conducting cost analyses, because when we know what our activities cost and what drive those costs, we can make decisions about how to help make our activities more sustainable and valuable. So as you all know, and as Joanie mentioned, access to books is a crucial element of learning, and therefore they're a meaningful piece of our education activity budgets. Currently, our team is conducting a cross-country cost analysis of 8 USAID-funded basic education activities. These activities occurred in different countries and had different activity structures. And among the 5 of them that we have clear data on teaching and learning materials, we found that the production and distribution of these materials takes up anywhere from 1% to 26% of the activity's total expenditure. So this is a wide range and shows that under some activity designs, book printing can account for a large proportion of our costs, often up to several $millions over the course of an activity. By better understanding the costs of different book types and what influences these costs in different contexts, donors, partners, and ministries of education can make more informed decisions about book procurement processes, activity design, budget expectations, and scale-up or sustainability initiatives. With this in mind, the DEEP team conducted a study to analyze the costs of teaching and learning materials, and we were guided by these 3 research questions. So as you see, what is the average per unit price and per unit price range of printing similar types of teaching and learning materials at the global and regional or sub-regional levels? What is the average procurement cost of each type of teaching and learning material? And what book or print order characteristics drive the per unit price for teaching and learning materials? To answer these questions, we analyzed purchase orders, price lists, and RFQs that were kindly shared with us by implementing partners. In total, we've received data from 17 USAID-funded activities in 16 countries. These activities were active from 2012 to 2019, with most being in the latter half of that range. And the data included 885 unique titles and over 27 million individual books ordered. The vast majority of the books in the study were ordered for activities in Africa and Asia, and were generally printed in the country where they were used. In the few cases where the books were printed in other countries than where they were used, they were usually in the same region, so shipping wasn't cross-continent. Additionally, most of the books in our sample were student readers and student workbooks, though we did look at some student textbooks, teachers' guides, and teacher read-alouds as well. And you'll see again in this chart that most of the books were from Africa and Asia. As we were reviewing all of this data from the purchase orders, we noticed that purchase order formats were not consistent across publishers or partners. There's a variety, or perhaps a discrepancy, of different types of information that can be found on the purchase orders. So some that we received contained very little information, really just enough data to determine the unit price of the books, while others provided data on a range of variables, including the book's language, the grade it is ordered for, the number of pages and the book dimensions, the cover type, weight, and color, the internal paper weight and color, whether or not there were illustrations, the type of binding, whether or not the purchase was exempt from taxes. So the data provided in the purchase orders did vary substantially. When we began to review the unit cost of the books, we saw that in most regions, student readers had the lowest costs, and that costs for books overall were lowest in the South Asia region. That said, the mean unit price and the price ranges varied substantially by both region and by the type of teaching and learning material. This is due to a range of factors, including how many books were printed in an order and where books were printed, among other things. You can see that with our current procurement processes, there are wide ranges in costs. This variety is, of course, due to different contexts, activity designs, but it also is influenced by the sometimes lack of clear procedures that USAID-funded activities have on how to control those book costs. The number of books printed in an order does seem to affect the unit price of books. So we saw that in smaller orders, there was a steep drop in the unit price as the quantity of the order increased. This effect remains up until the print run reaches about 100 copies in this data set. So after 100 copies, the unit price begins to plateau. So again, after 100 copies, increasing the quantity of books printed in an order doesn't seem to have much effect on the unit price. The next thing we looked at was how the characteristics of the books affected the cost of them. And as I noted earlier, not all purchase orders that we reviewed shared information about book characteristics. Only about 50% of them did. However, where data were available, the study investigated the different factors affecting the per unit costs, including quantity ordered, page count, total area, cover weight, type of binding, and type of cover. So we found that binding type influences individual book costs. Bindings with low and medium durability decrease the per unit cost of books, while more durable bindings increase the per unit cost of books. Additionally, increasing the page count or the total area of the book increased the unit cost. And as mentioned previously, individual book costs decreases as the quantity ordered increases. The data provided, unfortunately, didn't have sufficient variety in the cover and internal colors to determine the impact of colors on the price. And of course, these findings don't suggest that adjusting the book characteristics to lower cost is always the best choice. Of course, you need to consider things like the pedagogical needs and the needed life of the book. So one of the main things we saw, as I mentioned, is that there's an effect of the quantity of books ordered on the unit cost. We found that there's a nonlinear relationship between the quantity ordered and the individual book price. In other words, the quantity ordered affected the book price on most ordered up until they reached 100 copies. And given this, we recommend that future studies examine if there are similar relationships with other book characteristics to better understand in what context cost savings can be had by changing characteristics and at what point no additional savings will occur. Additionally, we found that book specifications do have an effect on cost. Book costs are influenced by the quantity ordered, the page count, the total area, and the type of binding. Using this knowledge, we hope folks will continue to discuss the factors that influence book costs with stakeholders and printers to determine if modifications to the book characteristics can lower costs without decreasing their pedagogical value. And finally, perhaps the finding that was the most salient to the research team as we were analyzing this data is the inconsistency of the purchase orders we received. Many purchase orders don't include information on the factors that may influence the cost of books, which limits the extent of the analysis that is possible with the existing data. So without consistent data from purchase orders on what is driving the cost of these books, we won't be able to make the well-informed decisions about how to lower costs. And it becomes more difficult to produce recommendations for book specifications and procurement for USAID programs. So given this, we recommend that a common purchase order template be developed, and we understand that might be difficult given that purchase order templates are often used for multiple types of transactions within an organization. So where possible, we would really recommend finding a way to consistently collect, capture, and record information on the book characteristics. Once we have this information, we can better select book characteristics and negotiate with printing companies in the procurement process. And this would also be useful for any future cross-partner analyses of books and would be helpful in supporting partners' internal accounting and price tracking. So before I conclude, I want to acknowledge that this was a very preliminary study that looked at a limited amount of data. We recognize that there are factors at play when we were able to incorporate the study, or factors at play that we were not able to incorporate, including details and regulations from publishers, the impact of where books are printed locally or internationally, and things that are often affected by local policies. So there's a lot more at play now, but here's some initial data we could pull. This study is not meant to make broad claims about the cost of teaching and learning materials, but we hope it can contribute to the conversation to demonstrate the value of collecting and sharing detailed data on the cost of books. We hope that future studies can obtain more data on book characteristics, can engage with publishers, can work closely with partners to understand their book ordering decisions. And we hope that the evidence base on the cost of teaching and learning materials will continue to grow so that partners and donors can make informed decisions that allow them to achieve cost savings on teaching and learning materials while maintaining the standard of the pedagogical value that we expect from these resources. And in fact, the World Bank has been doing some great work on this. So I'm excited for us all to hear from Penelope about the great data-informed resources and tools that the World Bank has developed to support book procurement decision-making. And with that, I'm excited to turn it over to Penelope to share those resources.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks for a great presentation. You really set the stage there. I would like to especially underline the importance of the findings on the variability of book cost and also on the importance of that information within the purchase orders. We see the same thing at the World Bank, and I'm hoping that the resources that we're developing, the resources that are available, we can really improve the quality of those documents and get more books for less. So let me try to share my screen, see if this all works. I hope everyone can see it. All right, I'm going to go ahead, and I assume that if you can't see it, someone will let me know. So welcome again to this part of the session. I'm so glad to see everyone here. We have a really diverse group. My name is Penelope Bender. I work on book supply chains and reading instruction at the World Bank. But like Joanie, I've spent many years, many decades working on trying to improve children's learning. And more recently, over the past decade or so, focusing on the book supply chain, as I realized that we could improve instruction, we could improve teacher support, but without books, children cannot learn to read. So Read at Home is a World Bank program that's designed to get more books into the hands of more children, primarily for home use for reading practice. And Read at Home is also supporting a major push on improving book procurement for textbooks, for reading books, and for the other types of instructional materials like teacher's guides that we need. So just to review again what Joanie said in her opening remarks, we're facing a learning crisis. In order to improve foundational literacy and numeracy, every student needs a textbook for reading and for math. Every teacher needs a teacher's guide, and there need to be reading books in every classroom. Learning to read requires reading practice, and so these additional reading books are just as important as the textbooks and the teacher's guides. Children and teachers need all three of these materials if we are to make progress on improving learning. Providing these materials for every student requires procurement. I'm sure there are many people on this call, myself included, who would love to just be able to call someone up, tell them that we need 10 million books and have those books arrive in schools. But given the kinds of funding we work with, the kinds of public money we manage, the kinds of projects we run, we have to do procurement to get our books. Book procurement is legendarily problematic. The World Bank has produced many studies over many years, including the wonderfully, if sadly titled, Where Have All the Textbooks Gone?, which came out a few years ago. As we saw in Emma's presentation, the costs of books vary greatly, and those costs are not linked to production costs. The cost of paper is very important in book costs, but what we see in procurement is that the way you do procurement is what determines the cost of your books. Procurement procedures in our agencies are very time-consuming. It can take a year, 2 years, or more. And I saw that there were several people on this call who have also been traveling that road with me over the past little while. Very, very time-consuming and complex. And we often find that books arrive late or they never arrive at all. So I'd like to give you another thing to do in the chat. If you could just quickly jot down the key words that you think of when you think of procurement. What do you think about? So if you could just take a minute and just write down a word or two about that. And those are the kinds of concerns that we're going to address today and that we hope to continue to address through the resources that we're providing. As an education community, we have to come together to solve these problems to address the learning crisis. So procurement goals are pretty straightforward. We're trying to improve student learning, and to do that requires the provision of textbooks, teachers' guides, and reading books. We're trying to develop country systems for procurement. And then in the procurements themselves, we want to get multiple responsive bids. Why do we want those? We want those because competition decreases costs. If we just have one bid, obviously they can ask whatever price they want. If we have multiple bids, but they're all from printers or publishers who can't work in our market, they will not provide the books that we need. So multiple responsive bids. We need the procurement process to be completed on time. School years start and school years end. Every child and every teacher needs to have these materials at the beginning of the school year so that instruction can begin on the very first day. We all know that instructional time is a tremendous problem in the countries we support. We all know that children and teachers are missing hours, days, and weeks of time to learn to read. Getting the materials there on the first day is one way to signal to everyone that school is starting on the first day, and one way to make sure that children have what they need to learn on that very first day. And we also need to take an active role in managing our book contracts, our publishing contracts, our printing contracts, and our distribution contracts so that they're carried out on time and correctly. It's not enough to sit back and think, oh my goodness, we went through all of this on procurement. The contract is signed. Now we can move on to working on something else. We have to actively manage those contracts from start to finish. Corruption. I could not give a presentation on the book supply chain and procurement without touching on the issue of corruption. This is something, again, that we should probably have a separate session about at another time. Corruption is a major problem existing in the book supply chain. The risk of corruption exists at all stages, from the time you start planning your procurement, to the production of your books, to the delivery of the books to the country or a central point, all the way to distribution and all the way to the school and the classroom. I have been in classrooms where teachers have traded books for soap, children's families have sold their books at the market, school directors have sold books. Usually the largest amounts of corruption, however, of course, happen where they're the largest opportunities, and that's at the contracting stage or the central level delivery stage. Corruption reduces competition, increases prices, and keeps students from learning. It is really a serious problem that we all need to address during the entire procurement process. So, the 10 ways that we have found to improve printing procurement. I want to just as a quick aside for those of you who are less involved in book procurement, there are 3 major stages. There's publishing, where you develop books, printing, you produce the books, and then distribution, you deliver the books to students. So this is really focused on printing, but it applies to the other parts of the procurement chain as well. So the first thing that we found to be important is to make procurement predictable. As I said earlier, the school year starts at the same time every year. Every year, children need books. Every year, those books need to be procured with the same timelines in order to allow distribution for the first day. So your procurement should be predictable. That way, your printers, your bidders can have paper available, can be ready to go, can organize and plan for your procurement. And that's how you get a large number of bids. Separate publishing and printing. These are two separate industries. They should be procured separately. If they're not, one side will outsource to the other side. It becomes more expensive, and it also becomes more complex to manage. Number 3, and this is probably my favorite, use correct, complete, and standard technical specifications. This is a large part of what Emma was talking about that USAID is seeing in their purchase orders. We see also at the World Bank technical specifications within procurement that do not have enough information, do not have the correct information, do not have much information at all, and all kinds of issues. So with the support of Christoph Barth and Stephanie Zeder at the Blue Tree Group, who have also supported us with many of these other issues, we developed a set of standard technical specifications for the 14 kinds of books that are most commonly procured in education projects. And those specifications lay out for you paper size, paper weight, paper brightness, binding type, all of the specifications that you need. So please use them, use them. They are all available, and we will show the site in just a little while, but those will really help to improve the quality of the books you're procuring. Number 4, everyone else's favorite, select the correct Incoterm to reduce delivery problems. I know talking about Incoterms is like speaking another language for many of us. Incoterms are not too complicated, and we've produced a really simple guide to help you understand Incoterms. They determine where the responsibility of the seller ends and the responsibility of the buyer begins. So basically, they orient your seller as to where they're going to just leave your books. Are your books going to the port, or are your books going to schools? You need the correct Incoterm to get the books to where you want them to go. Number 5, advertise widely and provide adequate time for bid preparation. If your procurement notice is published in one national newspaper, you will not get the number of bids you need. You need to advertise widely, ensure that your international bidders also have access to the information, and ensure that, of course, that all of your national and regional bidders have access as well. And allow enough time. Many of you on this call are involved in proposal preparation for different kinds of programs. You know it takes time to develop proposals, so provide adequate time. Make it easy and free to get bidding documents electronically. Do not make your national bidders travel hundreds or thousands of miles to the capital and pay to get bidding documents in person. I was very surprised to see that in many World Bank programs, a fee is charged to obtain bidding documents, and sometimes they're not available electronically. This presents many problems, and in many cases, it's the start of some less than best practices in procurement. If there has to be travel to produce documents, if there has to be payment to obtain documents, all of a sudden you know who's bidding, you know where they're coming from, you know who might be coming from the same region. All kinds of information starts to become apparent that makes the procurement process less than open and transparent. Number 7, answer questions promptly. Make sure your suppliers can provide the best possible bid, set reasonable timelines. This comes up again and again. There's often a delay in book development, and then all of a sudden you need the printing because the school year is going to start, but there's not enough time to print them. So you have to set reasonable timelines so your printers can print and deliver. Over the longer term, build procurement capacity of governments and donors, and ensure transparency throughout the process. All communication through official channels, no telephone numbers in the bidding documents, all specifications clear and complete. Emma mentioned taxes, information about taxes, clear and complete. All of these factors decrease corruption, increase transparency, and allow you to buy more books for lower costs. So these are some of the things that we've developed at Read at Home to support the wider community in book procurement. We provide technical assistance for countries to source, select, and develop quality reading materials for children in languages they know. So a special effort to develop titles in underserved languages, familiar languages, home languages where we don't have enough titles. Technical assistance across the book supply chain. Technical assistance around innovative procurement. I feel quite strongly that we cannot continue to procure the way we've been procuring. It takes too long. The operational costs, the opportunity costs, are too high, and we're not getting the books we need on time. So we're looking at 3 approaches: direct title procurement, which is where we procure titles directly from publishers in the languages we need. We've had a lot of success with this over the first few years of Read at Home. Pre-qualification, which is basically a shortlisting procedure to reduce procurement complexity. And multi-year framework contracts, which is really where I think we need to concentrate our efforts. UNICEF has been a pioneer in this area, and so we know that it's possible. It's done with other commodities like health sector commodities. This is where, if you're running a 5-year program and you're going to procure books 3 times, you do procurement once, and you draw down on that contract throughout the life of your project. So the procurement process, with all of its steps and all of its formalities and all of its documentation and complexities, you do that one time and then draw down. And of course, this also decreases costs because increasing quantities decreases costs. The last part that we've been working on are global public goods around strengthening the procurement process. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about those. So these are the procurement resources that we've developed through Read at Home, and they're all available for everyone to use. They're translated into French and Portuguese, and we're finishing Spanish and working on Arabic. So guidance for authors and illustrators to develop a wide range of children's books. These supplemental readers are not supplemental. Everyone needs additional books for reading practice. So this guidance talks about all kinds of books that we haven't used very much in our program so far. Pattern books, concept books, poetry, reader's theater, different genres that we need to start working on. Copyright and contracting. How do you negotiate licenses for copyrighted materials to bring down costs? And open licensing, which is of course the gold standard for materials that are developed with public resources. Procurement specific documents, guidance to using the World Bank bidding document for textbooks, which covers issues that are common across a range of donors and NGOs and should be useful for everyone. A guidance note on production, which builds on work that USAID did several years ago about fonts and color and other aspects of book design. The technical specifications that I mentioned earlier, Incoterms and insurance. And then we did a country case study on Mozambique to highlight some of the good practices that Mozambique has used over the years. We also provide staff and consulting time for World Bank teams. And I want to give a shout out as well to some of the resources that USAID and the Global Book Alliance and the Global Book Alliance in Action project have produced. They've also done numerous book supply chain studies. They've produced a range of training modules, which are going to be launched soon. And of course, staff at USAID and partners provide technical assistance for those teams. These are just an illustration of some of the documents that are available. Again, I'd like to thank Christophe and Stephanie and Blue Tree for their support with this work. And I hope that everyone will download them, use them, and find their lives made easier and the children they work with receiving more books strengthening their reading, and just enjoying the worlds that reading books can open up to them. If you need any additional information, have any questions or follow-up, please do not hesitate to reach out and email me. My address is on this screen. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you, Penelope, and thank you, Emma. What a rich, rich, rich discussion and notes to us all to keep in mind. Peggy Dubeck says we should get t-shirts that say supplemental readers are not supplemental. Yeah, I'd wear that in a second. So I think we should do it, and we can join some sort of weird team. But
we're already on that team.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we don't have that many questions in the Q&A yet, but we have enough to get started. And we have some ones that came in a little bit earlier that I'm going to refer to first before I take the 3 that are in the Q&A. The first, since you're right on the screen, Penelope, I'll start with you, and then there are 2 for Emma, and I'll give you both of those at the same time. So to Penelope, what are the resources you need? Like, what are the must-haves to make book procurement in the program you support effective, efficient, and transparent?
Well, I hope that we have provided all of the resources that you need. So between the Read at Home site that has all of this guidance to procurement and the USAID GBA Gabaya resources, I think we have produced all of the print resources that you need. If you need technical assistance, even if you're not at the bank or USAID, please reach out and we'll try to steer you to people who can help you. In addition to that, I would say that you need a team of people in your country who are committed, engaged, and ready to learn. They do not have to know. They need to be ready to learn. And you need to work in collaboration with your procurement specialists if you're working on a donor-funded program to help you do the procurement. They know about procurement. You're going to know about books. And so together, you'll be the team that can create adequate, effective procurement documents and get your procurement done in the way that you need to get it done. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or you need other resources.
Thank you, Penelope. I'm going to ask Emma one of the 2 because questions are starting to come in the chat. So I want to make sure I get to them. There's a couple really interesting ones about ebooks that I think we should look at together. So Emma, deep study found that increasing the number of copies orders can lower unit prices of books, but only up to a point. Is this finding affected by other book characteristics?
Yeah, thank you. So the kind of overarching theme of our study was that because of the limited data on the purchase orders, we can't make strong conclusions on a lot of these questions, but there are some suggestions from other research that this is the case. So there's a study from FCDO that found that the price reducing effects of increasing the book quantity ordered plateaued depending on the number of colors used in the text. So colors was something we weren't able to produce findings on, but they found that after about 35 to 50,000 copies for 4-color books and about 7,500 to 10,000 copies for 1-color books was where the price reducing effect wore off. So we do expect that with more comprehensive data on book characteristics and costs, we can see how additional factors interact with the quantity order to lower printing costs. So it's an exciting area to continue doing some research.
Thank you.
Joanie, if I could.
Please.
So just to add, these factors are important. The kind of paper you use, the kind of binding you use, the number of copies. But what we've seen is that the most important thing is effective, transparent procurement. So changing the technical specifications of your books may increase prices by 20%, 30%, 50%. You know, other people can weigh in. I'd have to do some calculations on the particular specification. But we find that doing effective procurement can reduce your costs significantly. As I mentioned, probably the most well-known example is that of Kenya, where the price of books went down from $6 a copy to 84 cents a copy. We've seen very similar changes happening in read-at-home countries, where we've been able to order more than double the number of books we were expecting because efficient procurement lowered the cost so much. So all of these factors are important. And with the standard technical specifications, you should be able to procure the best fit for purpose books. And with effective procurement, you'll get the lowest cost, highest quality.
Super. Judith Baker has a few different questions. I'm going to start with the one at the top. How do you see the interaction of ebooks and print books, and how might ebooks be printed most efficiently when useful or necessary? Penelope?
Sure, I can start, and then Emma, if you want to add. So the issue around ebooks is really an issue around devices, connectivity, and electricity. And if you work in a location where those are available for young children, then by all means, you can use ebooks. There's been some research showing that learning is not as effective on electronic devices and some things like that, but there's some settings where they can be used. Most of the countries we support do not have those conditions for young children. So here we're thinking 5 years old, 6 years old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, they don't have devices, electricity, or connectivity. In terms of printing ebooks in the format that they're in right now are not usable for large scale printing. And so we have started a major initiative through Read at Home in partnership or collaboration with USAID, Neil Butcher and Associates, Blue Tree, Electric Bookworks, Room to Read, where we are developing print-ready files of books that have previously been produced primarily for electronic use. So on the Early Literacy Resource Network, and I think the link is in the chat, you can see the beta version of the site. And we will be continuing to upload thousands of titles that have been converted to be print ready. So you can download those files from the site and send them directly to the printer. So that is how we're managing the electronic book to the print book situation, because as they exist now, they are not usable for large scale printing.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch with that. And then Emma, I'll let you go. That's a critical issue. Having been an implementer in the field, learning all about book procurement, that's the critical piece, is if books are not print ready, it doesn't really matter. I know that sounds really harsh, but when you're talking about millions of books in a country like Ethiopia, and you can't access books in a print ready format, it doesn't matter because it just becomes so untenable at scale. And that's where we have struggled mightily. Emma?
Yeah, quickly, I want to reiterate Penelope's point about access, and that if there's not the technology available for ebooks to be accessed, then the value of them is insignificant. But there are a few cases that we've seen in research when there is access technology that is useful. Ebooks can be helpful in gaining access to students with disabilities when they do have access to these technologies in the classroom. And also just 1 or 2 studies that showed that when the technology is available in the classroom, but not the home, it can actually increase student engagement with the ebooks just because the novelty of the technology is exciting and they get excited to read the books. I'm not sure if that's a lasting effect or initial effect. It's just preliminary research, but just some things to keep in mind as the research develops here. But to both of your points, the access and the print ready files are really the crucial point here.
Thank you. And I see it's 8:57. I'm going to go with this question from Juan. I wonder what has been the experience of market concentration in the market for books in the countries under analysis, or the market of paper importing. Anecdotal evidence seems to suggest that this concentration happens in many countries. Any lessons, experiences that you'd like to share, either of you? Over.
So Juan, I'm wondering if you're talking about concentration of paper supply in particular or more broadly. I'd be happy to talk to you more about this offline. We do see in some settings that there are deliberate efforts to reduce the number of bidders through the formation of what we call cartels, where printers or publishers get together and they decide the prices that they're going to offer along with other elements of their offer. So that is certainly a problem. And that's one reason why I really encourage the use of international competitive bidding when the quantities are large enough, which is pretty much always to justify it. When you do that, you increase competition and you increase transparency. You can still have problems. You can definitely still have problems. Every time I think that I've seen the very last possible way that you can have corruption in the book supply chain, I see something new. So it can continue. But again, I'd be happy to talk to you offline about the particular issues you're facing and strategies that we might use to confront them.
Thank you, Penelope. And there is another question about paper weight and such. And I think that's another good offline conversation, because some recent research just came out about even how and why you would reuse books, and should you. So there's a question. So that's another offline conversation because they're somewhat related. It's 8:59. So I am sorry to say we can't finish up all the questions that we have. It's been a delight to really spend this time. We could talk about this for hours and days. And I want to thank my two esteemed colleagues who are good think partners as we start to really, try to crack this code. Now that we understand how to crack the code around what kind of instruction children need to read, we need to crack the code around the book chain process. So thank you, Emma and Penelope, and all of you for your time and attention. Keep sharing. Go to the GBA website, put your thoughts in, share your experiences. We want to learn. We're all learners in this process. As I mentioned, 1994 is the first time I ever heard about a book chain. And I, fast forward to 2022. So there you go. Thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, afternoon, and we will be in touch again soon. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks all.